By the end of this video, you'll understand why the CEO of Nvidia, the most valuable tech company on Earth, is warning that China could win the AI race, and why he says America might be helping that happen by accident. This isn't just about chips and benchmarks. It's about who controls the next industrial revolution, who sets the rules, and who gets left behind. Stay to the end because the part that affects you, as a developer, founder, or just a user of AI, is not what most headlines are talking about. In November 2025, Jensen Huang, the leather jacket-wearing CEO of Nvidia, stepped on stage at the Financial Times Future of AI Summit and dropped a political grenade. He said in essence that China is on track to beat the United States in AI, helped by cheap energy, aggressive subsidies, and fewer rules. At the same time, the Trump White House has doubled down on blocking Nvidia's most advanced Blackwell AI chips from being sold to China, framing it as a national security line in the sand. So you've got the world's top AI chipmaker, warning the government that its own policies might cost America the lead in AI. That's the tension this video unpacks. On stage in London, Huang didn't hedge. He argued that if current trends continue, China will pull ahead in the AI race. Not in theory, but in practical deployment, power, and scale. He pointed to something deceptively simple: electricity prices. In his view, Chinese AI companies benefit from state-backed energy that makes running massive data centers dramatically cheaper than in the US or Europe. Huang also criticized what he called a culture of cynicism in the West, his word for the combination of fear, political drama, and regulation that, in his view, slows down actual building. Across US states and in Europe, new AI rules, licensing ideas, and safety requirements are piling up, even as the technologies they target are still evolving. Here's where it gets interesting. Within 24 hours of headlines saying China will win the AI race, Nvidia released a follow-up statement from Huang on X. He clarified, China is only nanoseconds behind the US in AI, and it is vital that America wins by racing ahead and winning developers around the world onto its tech stack. In other words, he wasn't cheering for China. He was sounding an alarm. The gap is tiny, China is gaining fast, and the US can't afford to slow itself down. At Nvidia's developer event in Washington just days earlier, he'd already warned that a policy that cuts America off from China's massive AI developer base could backfire badly. He argued that if US policy leads to America losing half of the world's AI developers, that hurts the US more than it helps, because those developers will simply build on other hardware and platforms. Meanwhile, the Trump administration's stance has hardened. Officials have said openly that Nvidia's top Blackwell chips are not something we're interested in selling to China at this time, echoing Trump's own promise to reserve the most advanced chips for American companies. That clash, a security-first White House versus a globalization-first chip giant, is the core drama behind the headlines. And it's not just about money, it's about who writes the operating system of the future. To understand why Huang is so worried, you have to zoom out and look at how AI power really compounds over time. Think of advanced AI like building a skyscraper. The chips are the steel beams, the data centers are the land, the developers are the architects, and the regulations are the building codes. If steel is cheap, land is subsidized, and permits are fast, and you build higher, faster. That's the argument Huang is making about China. Low-cost power, heavy government backing, and a more permissive regulatory environment give Chinese firms an acceleration lane. On the US side, export controls now block Nvidia's most capable AI accelerators from being sold into China, forcing Nvidia to design cut-down versions or lose the market entirely. Those controls started under earlier administrations but have intensified, targeting each new Nvidia architecture, from A100 and H100 to H20 variants and now Blackwell, whenever performance risks crossing US security thresholds. Here's the part that surprised many investors. Huang has said those restrictions are already pushing big Chinese tech firms to accelerate their own AI chip programs and shift to domestic suppliers like Huawei and others. In short, when you close one door, another ecosystem opens. At the same time, research on AI leadership still shows US and allied companies ahead on many key metrics. Top-cited AI papers, state-of-the-art model releases, and frontier lab output. But China is catching up fast in volume, funding, and deployment, investing heavily in national AI strategies, local chip design, and large-scale model training. Inside China, analysts note that many strategists still see the US as the current AI leader, but they treat that as a challenge to close the gap, not a permanent reality. Huang's warning lives exactly in that narrow space. A world where America is slightly ahead, but no longer by default. So what does this actually look like on the ground, beyond diplomatic statements and conference soundbites? Start with developers. Imagine you're a Chinese startup founder building a foundation model for finance or robotics. Before export controls, Nvidia reportedly had overwhelming share of the high-end AI chip market in China, but that presence has now been slashed as restrictions tightened and Beijing encouraged domestic alternatives. You might still want Nvidia's latest GPUs, but if you can't legally buy them, you pivot. You move to local chips, retool your software stack, and pour money into optimizing for that hardware. Chinese cloud providers and big tech firms are already doing exactly that, shifting budgets from imported GPUs to local accelerators and in-house AI chips, spurred on by both US bans and Chinese industrial policy. From Huang's perspective, that's the nightmare scenario. A huge part of the world's AI talent, building on a completely separate technology tree. Outside the US-centric ecosystem, Nvidia dominates. He has framed the ideal outcome very clearly. A world where America wins the AI race by having the global AI stack built on American technology, from chips to frameworks to cloud. That means two things in practice. US companies keep supplying the fastest, most efficient hardware. Developers everywhere, and including in China, keep choosing that hardware because it's simply better and more accessible. Export bans interfere with that second part. Even if they protect short-term security interests, they risk pushing half the developer universe into an alternate orbit. Meanwhile, China's own AI applications are scaling quickly, from generative models tuned for Chinese language and regulations to AI-powered surveillance, logistics, and manufacturing optimization at national scale. Here's a subtle but important point. Even if US labs still lead on paper and frontier research, real-world influence comes from deployment. Whose tools enterprises run, whose platforms students learn on, whose chips power the world's data centers. That's why Huang spends so much time talking about developers rather than just chips. Developers are the gravitational center. Win them, and you slowly bend the entire AI universe around your stack. Of course, there's a reason Washington is doing this. Advanced AI chips aren't just for chatbots. They can power autonomous weapons, cyber operations, and military decision systems. US strategists worry that unrestricted access to Nvidia's top hardware could supercharge China's military AI capabilities, not just its commercial tech giants. On the other side, there's a different kind of risk. A fragmented AI world where US and Chinese tech stacks diverge, standards drift apart, and safety practices don't cross borders. Huang's argument is that if America overcorrects on control and fear, it might slow its own innovation while accelerating a rival ecosystem that it no longer understands or influences. Here's the ethical twist. Both sides talk about safety and security, but the race dynamic itself, with each side terrified of falling behind, can push everyone to cut corners in testing and deployment. So where does this actually go? Current research suggests that in many core AI metrics, US and allied labs still hold a lead. But that lead is narrowing, and China is rapidly building capacity across chips, compute, and scientific output. Some models project that China's overall scientific leadership across key technologies like AI and semiconductors could reach parity with the US later in this century if trends continue. But that's the long game. The next 5 to 10 years will be shaped by choices being made right now. How hard the US leans into export controls versus global engagement. How aggressively China subsidizes compute, data centers, and domestic chips. How developers, startups, and enterprises decide which ecosystem to bet their careers on. Here's the provocative thought to end on. The winner of the AI race might not be the country with the single best model, but the one whose tools quietly become the default for everyone else. Jensen Huang's message isn't subtle. America is still ahead, but only by nanoseconds. And that gap can vanish fast if policy and pessimism choke the very developers it needs to win. China, meanwhile, is turning pressure into fuel, using subsidies, cheap power, and focused industrial policy to sprint toward AI self-reliance. So here's the question for you. In a world splitting into rival AI stacks, which one do you want to be building on? And what happens if you choose wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is Huang right? Or is this just corporate self-interest dressed up as geopolitics? And if you found this breakdown useful, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still thinks chips just mean snacks. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.